Inside a high-security archive in the Vatican sits a single, degraded videotape. It clearly shows a priest sitting in a confession booth, leaning toward the camera with completely blackened eyes. The recording captures him asking for forgiveness for what he has become. Then he leans into the microphone and asks, "Can you hear them too?" This is the final record of Father Michael, a Vatican investigator who walked into a local legend to document a haunting and ended as a host for something else entirely. The investigation began here, in the isolated, moss-draped swamps of southern Louisiana. In 1923, local authorities boarded up this structure, known as the Church of No Return. The official records cite severe structural damage as the reason it was condemned. Local stories claimed otherwise. Residents spoke of a string of disappearances, involving anyone who entered the building to perform a confession. The Vatican viewed these reports as regional superstition. They opened a formal file to debunk the claims and finalize the decommissioning of the property. They assigned the case to Father Michael, providing him with a standard investigation kit and a mandate to provide a logical explanation for the rumors. Michael approached the site with the assumption that he was documenting a series of architectural failures and rural myths. When Michael reached the church, a thick fog had settled over the rotting wood. Above the main entrance, an old cross had been mounted upside down. As he stepped through the front door, the heavy oak panels slammed shut behind him. The rusted locks engaged on their own. Inside, the pews were shattered and covered in dust. At the front of the sanctuary, a single confession box remained upright before the altar. A light, rhythmic tapping began to echo from behind the curtain of the empty booth. Michael entered the priest's side of the booth and whispered, "Speak, my child." A heavy, distorted voice responded from the other side. I listened. Frantic scratching erupted from the wood panels surrounding Michael. A chorus of voices began shouting a single instruction. "Don't listen! Don't listen! Don't listen!" Michael threw open the door to the penitent's side. The booth was empty, but "It hears through you" was smeared in blood across the wall. The entity within the church had taken the traditional space of the confession and inverted its purpose, turning the act of listening into a physical threat. Suddenly, hundreds of overlapping whispers filled the church, loud enough to drown out Michael's thoughts. He moved toward the altar, finding a small, concealed door hidden behind the heavy stone base. He followed a narrow, pitch-black staircase down into a cavernous hall buried deep beneath the swamp. The walls of this underground chamber were covered in hundreds of names, carved deep into stone. The church above functioned as a collection point. This subterranean pit served as the storage for those who had been taken. Michael stood over a central pit in the middle of the hall, raised his cross, and began the opening lines of an exorcism. His voice cut off. An invisible force gripped his throat, lifting him off the floor and silencing the prayer. A shape rose from the dark pit. It was a mass of hundreds of shifting faces, some weeping and others laughing, moving as one body. The mass moved toward him, whispering one final phrase. "We listened. Now you will too." Michael's eyes turned solid black. He stopped struggling and stood perfectly still as the whispers moved from the room into his mind. This brings us back to the Vatican recording. We are seeing the entity speak through Michael's physical form. The curse is not simply contained within the architecture. The entity uses the silence of the swamp to actively hunt for new hosts. The growth of this entity depends entirely on the human instinct to listen and investigate the source of a sound. The threat is no longer contained within the church walls. The whispers have been reported in the woods surrounding the parish, often calling out the specific names of passersby. If you acknowledge your name, the entity follows you. It stays at the edge of your hearing, waiting in your home. Eventually, a physical compulsion takes over, driving the victim to return to the Louisiana swamp for a final confession. If you are ever in the swamp and hear your name whispered from the trees, do not respond. Silence is the only way to avoid becoming another name on the wall.